Hi, everyone, and welcome to GitOps Without the Drama, real-world Kubernetes CD with Codefresh. My name is John Bristow. I'm a member here of the team at Octopus Deploy, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar. Before we get things started, just a couple of housekeeping notes before we begin. I've got Dan here waiting to present. This session is being recorded. It will be available to watch on demand afterwards. You can check it out up on our YouTube channel. If you haven't subscribed, as the kids say, you can go ahead and check us out. Just search for Octopus Deploy up on YouTube. You'll find us there. We'll be taking questions throughout this session, so feel free to drop them into the chat at any time. We'll answer them as many as we can and live. I'm sure Dan can handle it. And wherever you're joining us from, thank you for your time and attention. We're really excited to see such a global audience here today. So today we're talking about GitOps. The idea sounds simple, obviously, using Git as a single source of truth for Kubernetes deployments, but in practice, it often gets a little messy, as Dan will describe, and between fragile pipelines, steep learning curves, and often too many moving parts, many teams struggle to make GitOps work at scale. And that's where Codefresh comes in. So joining us today is Dan Garfield, who's the VP of Open Source at Octopus Deploy and one of the creators behind Codefresh GitOps Cloud. Dan's going to show us how real-time teams are simplifying Kubernetes CD with better tooling, better visibility, and way less drama. Dan, take it away.
Perfectly stated. Thank you, John. So glad to be here and talk with you all about this today, because I think it's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to talk about a couple of different concepts that are going to have an impact for you. And I see people are joining from Denver, from Utah, from Munich, from Romania. So keep those comments coming. I really appreciate it. Helps me know that people are paying attention. So today we're going to do this. We're going to do this actually in a kind of two sections. We're going to do kind of a theory section, and then we're going to get into a hands-on section. And again, shout out those questions as you have them, and we'll have a good time. So the first thing that everyone I think knows is that Argo CD is this brilliant tool that is very good at deploying manifests to Kubernetes and making sure that they're in sync with the Git repo. And that's really its only job. Its only job is to look at a source of truth and make sure that that source of truth is reflected on a Kubernetes cluster. And it's great for that. But there are all of these things that we need to do around that problem. Like, how do you manage in multiple environments? How do you manage promotions? How do you handle configuration management? How do you do security, scale? Do you have a disaster recovery plan? How does it integrate with CI? How do you build your artifacts? All of these things are going to be a critical part of the process. And I'll try to stop moving around my face so much. But all of these things are going to be a critical part of the process, but they're not necessarily things that are covered directly inside of Argo CD. And I don't know if everybody, I think this session we said, let's talk about Kubernetes CD, and Argo is going to be a component of that, but it's not going to be the whole story. So some of this is, you may have seen, I did a talk in KubeCon, ArgoCon London, about a month ago with Victor Farsek, where we talked about 1 million ways to promote changes between environments. And today, we're going to focus on my favorite one, the one that I recommend, the one that I work on, the one that I think is the future and the tool that has the biggest impact. And so I'm excited to share that with you today. And if you haven't seen that talk, definitely check it out, because we go through a lot of the theory about how promotions should work. We're not necessarily going to cover some of those things today and some of the kind of the philosophical aspects of these different approaches. But today we're going to focus on the one that is my favorite. And that is, of course, Codefresh GitOps. And this has a Argo control plane and has promotions and allows us to do all kinds of that fun stuff. So we'll get into that in a second. But first, let's take the drama out of GitOps. We're going to do that by talking a little bit about the theory first. So let's start with this question. What do developers want? They want to get a change into production with as few problems as possible. They want to have as few roadblocks, issues, confusion, or whatever. They want to have a very clear way to get their changes into production. And that's really all that they care about. At the end of the day, this is like the whole core function of the job. And a lot of times when we get into the deployment process and flow, we get maybe a little bit stuck in the trees, and we don't remember that this is the forest. There's really just one goal, and it's to get those changes into production as quickly as possible. So the developers want to have that ability to get that code written and get there. And so to get to prod, we do need to build our changes, and then we go into the deployment loop where we promote our changes to a place where we can test them. You might start locally. I debated if promote should be at the end of that loop or the beginning. We need to test our changes, and then we need to either debug and fix issues, or we need to do a rollback and then debug and fix issues. And then we just keep going. We keep on promoting. So we go typically from a development environment, a QA environment, a staging environment, a production environment, right? And so we have to go through these steps, and we need a good way to validate our changes. So we're going from dev to staging to production. So far, pretty simple. But I want to introduce a couple of some terminology and some concepts. And the first one that we're going to talk about is applications, because this actually means a lot of things. If someone says, oh, is there an app for that? You're going to think about your mobile phone. If someone says, I develop an application, you're going to think, oh, that application might have a number of microservices associated with it. And if you're using Argo CD, an application has a very clear definition, which is a collection of manifests and resources that Argo CD is going to be monitoring. So application can mean a number of different things. So let's take this example. We've got a dev, staging, and production, and each of these is going to have its own Argo CD application. And typically, these are each going to have their own Git source of truth. And sometimes we do see people who will point 3 different environments at a single Git configuration, and there can be reasons to do that. But in general, that means that they are now coupled in a way that makes it difficult to test them independently. You want to actually have your sources of truth be testable independently of one another in most situations. So this is actually, in the world of Kubernetes, in the world of Argo CD, this is 3 applications. And so this can lead to confusion when you're saying, hey, is that in production? And you're saying, well, you're asking me about a change, or you're asking me about a specific application. That application is always in production, but you're asking me if something has made it to production. Maybe that's a different question. So to clear up this confusion, we call these applications that are related to each other a product. Okay, so what are you shipping? I'm shipping a product. And that product has a number of applications in it, and it can be in multiple environments. But the thing that I'm working on is a product. And that makes it really easy to just conceptually wrap your head around how these things are going to relate to each other. So what does a product give us? Why is it actually useful? Well, first of all, it's the thing you actually ship across environments. Okay, because you actually don't ship applications. If you're using Argo CD, you don't ship applications across environments. Those are different applications, right? And it does comprise multiple applications. And here we're using that in the strict Argo CD technical sense of the word. But they contain comparable manifests. So things that you want to diff between, things that you want to say, I'm going to make a change here, and then if that change works well, I'm going to make that same change over here. And that's all going to be part of a single product. And so here you can see the example of us doing a diff between 2 different applications, right? But these are all part of a product. And so when I compare them, I know that what I'm looking at is something that has essentially it's sharing a life cycle that goes across multiple applications, multiple environments. Okay. So that's number one. Number one is a product. Okay. So that's pretty simple. The second concept that we're going to talk about is versions. And most commonly, and again, we're going to be kind of oriented around Argo CD here. We have an application is pointing at a Git hash. Okay. Now that Git hash could contain anything. It could contain any code changes, any manifest changes. It might just have an image that's been updated. But that image update could have, 10,000 code changes in it, or it could have 1 code change in it. It could be a simple typo fix, or it could be a complete revamp. The Git hash doesn't really mean anything for a developer. So developers don't really care about Git hashes. The Git hash is useful to point them to a specific place in the Git tree, but it doesn't actually tell them deeper than that. And with GitOps, the problem is actually compounded because the very first thing you do when you adopt GitOps is you separate your application repo where you're building code. And here, see, I'm using application in a different sense of the word. This is the place where you're actually making code, building a binary, and you separate that from your ops repo, the place where we describe what version should be deployed, how many deployments there should be, how many replicas there should be, if there should be a stateful set, the service, whatever. All those manifests and components you need to actually run a Kubernetes application, right? So you separate those 2 repos, and what it allows you to do when you separate them is really great. I can iterate on my application code, right? My binary. And when I'm ready, I can trigger a change on my ops repo and say, hey, go take the new version that's available. And that's really wonderful because that separation of concerns is going to make everybody's lives easier. So we definitely recommend that. But the second that you do that, it also means that from an ops standpoint, every time you look at what version is deployed, you're just looking at a Git hash that contains a reference to a new image binary and maybe some additional configuration changes. And so you don't know what's going on inside of that binary. And so from a developer standpoint, I say, hey, I want to promote to production. Am I going to promote that commit? Well, I mean, I might reference that commit, but that same commit is going to be a new commit in production, right? So I'm not really promoting a commit. So Git hashes are useful, but they're actually not the thing that we care about. And hello to our visitors from Istanbul and South Africa. Keep those comments coming. Really appreciate it. Tell me what your favorite number of Kubernetes nodes is. Mine's 5. So keep that discussion going. We appreciate it. So instead of thinking about Git hashes, let's instead thinking about what we're talking about, versions. So my application repo has a new version, and it's version 1.3.457. You might have a dev tag on it or whatever. That's totally fine. But let's have the version that I'm communicating to my developers be something that is meaningful to them, so that when they say, oh, I'm going to deploy 1.3.4, they know that 1.3.4 actually means something, right? That's like a release, and I can go and look at release notes, and that can be associated in any environment, because that might require multiple Git hashes as I update my configuration repo, my ops repo, but we are deploying a specific version of the application. So we've basically just created a link back to the application repo that we can follow through our deployment process. And the other thing that you want to do when you're doing versioning is, instead of always referencing a number, you may actually want to reference an environment. I want to promote what's currently in dev. I want to promote what's currently in staging. Actually, I need to bring what's in production into a staging environment so that I can do some debugging, or a dev environment. So now, instead of always referencing things by a Git hash, we could reference them by their application version, which has meaning that goes beyond just a Git hash, or by the environment as a source of truth. Okay. Rick says, nodes, I finally got past network issues with 210. So that is my favorite number of nodes. Okay, perfect. So 210 is the number of nodes where you finally got past your network issues. That's very good. Thank you, Rick. So that's versions. Okay. So we've done two. We've done products versus applications. We've done versioning. We've talked about that, versus Git hashes. Now, here's another concept, and this is the last one we're going to go through before we jump into kind of some hands-on stuff, and we can see how this is implemented, is environments. So this whole time we've been talking about dev, staging, and production, and I've had a Kubernetes logo next to it, implying that production is a Kubernetes cluster. But for many people, for most people, production isn't a Kubernetes cluster. It's multiple Kubernetes clusters. They've got, US East, US West, EU West, EU East, Asia 1, Asia 2, whatever it is. So the concept that we've actually been talking about, notice how natural it's been for us as we've talked about dev, staging, and production. We've been referring to those as environments, but behind the scenes, that actually could mean a lot of different things. So production might be these 3 different clusters, or for some people, it's one cluster that has multiple namespaces, and production is a specific namespace. That's very common, especially in larger kind of monolithic organizations. So when we talk about deploying to production, isn't it better for us to talk about production rather than cluster East 1, blah, blah, blah? In fact, Kubernetes clusters don't even have names. That's not even a concept within Kubernetes. If you go look, I mean, somebody in the comments, go look and Google kubectl, get the name of a cluster, and what it will tell you is that there are no names of clusters. That's something that you add to your own kube config. So clusters don't even have the concept of names. So when we give them this idea of dev and staging, what we're really talking about is any number of configurations that could exist underneath the label of production. Dave says 210 is an even number. I've been brainwashed in the Kubernetes world to abhor even numbers. That's true, actually. I had a little bit of a dilemma. I was thinking I have a 3-node cluster back here, and I was thinking about adding a 4th node, and I was like, oh man, I can't have 4 nodes. I'd have to have 5 nodes. I need to have an even number or an odd number. I mean, yeah, great comment, Dave. Okay, so the third concept here is the concept of environments, because developers don't actually care about clusters. That's an ops problem. Production exists. Operations might be saying, oh, we actually need 2 clusters, or I need 5 clusters. Oh, we actually need to split these 2. We need to merge this one. Behind the scenes, they might be doing all kinds of wacky stuff. But me as a developer, I want to get my changes into prod. The definition of prod is up to somebody else, right? I don't actually want to care about that. So this is the third concept that I want to introduce to you. And these things, so we have apps versus products. And if you stop thinking about apps and start thinking about products, then you are already thinking about the life cycle of getting a change into production, which again is what developers care about. And if you stop thinking about Git hashes and start thinking about versions, you're now going to be speaking the same language, right? So that you always, when you say, oh, this is 134, boom, I know what 134 is. We just shipped that release, And if that could be represented in multiple different Git configurations. Remember this slide back here where we're pointing out that each of these have these different Git sources. Those each have different, they could be deploying the same version and have 3 different hashes on them. But as a developer, I care that my version is deployed. Luke's got a great comment here. He says, how about products environments are federated? All config goes into one cluster, some config goes into another cluster. It's a great point. I think, and this is another example where if you have like, what I think what you're really saying is you have components that are going into cluster 1 and other components that are going to cluster 2, but those are considered part of the same environment, but they're actually splitting up their components into multiple clusters. And in that case, and we'll get into this in the concept when we get hands-on here in a second, but we would probably think about those as being different products. But you might actually want to orchestrate their release together. And so that gets definitely a little bit more complex. And then Laurent says, you care about clusters as they are the target for your Argo CD application. Well, that's true for your Argo CD application, but you don't, as a developer, I only care that my application is getting deployed to the right place. So how much do I care about Argo CD applications? I really only care about it insofar as it helped me debug, right? In that core loop process that we were talking about, insofar it helps me debug issues or see what's in production or that kind of thing. So great comment, Laurent. Thank you. And Luke says also ingress. Yeah, ingress is a whole. Yeah, that's right. You have to do that oftentimes separately. And so there is a concept we have about grouping applications. We can talk more about that maybe in a minute. Okay, so now that we have these 3 concepts, and it's firmly in your mind about the value of having these 3 different concepts. Let's get into the real world, and I'm going to jump into Codefresh and show you how these concepts are going to make our life easier and help us get rid of the quote drama, the GitOps drama. So I'm here inside of Codefresh. If you haven't seen Codefresh before, you can go to codefresh.io and you can create a free account and start trying it out and trying these different concepts that we have in here. They're going to be so useful for you. And so the first place that we're going to start we're going to start from kind of the Argo CD side. We're going to go over to our GitOps apps. Now, Codefresh is a control plane for Argo CD. And so here I've got a number of different applications and application sets. And we do see that there are clusters named here, right? But there's also this concept that they're actually part of an environment as well. So this is going to get more relevant in a second. But one of the cool things about this is that as I have different Argo CD instances, they all are going to roll up into this single view. And I can maybe zoom out just a little bit. But this single view so that I have a clear way of connecting and working with those no matter where they are, even if they're even if they're behind the firewall, even if they're in a store in the middle of Albuquerque, New Mexico, or if they're in a cloud hosted in the EU or whatever, I'm going to have a single interface to go and work with these. And for those of you that are familiar with Argo CD, this interface will look very familiar because all of the features and functions that you have in Argo CD are going to be here. I can jump into a pod and look at events and review logs and do any of the debugging stuff that I would normally do. But we also have this concept of a release timeline, which is going to show me all of the changes that have happened to this application. But in here, we're still thinking about the application level, okay? So I don't want to dwell too long here, but I've got my different versions, and I can see that Codefresh is actually extracting from the manifests what image was updated, and it's pulling from that what pull requests were being worked on, what Jira issues were being worked on, what CI pipeline built it, who the committers were, what their commits were. So I do still have commit hashes here, but they are recontextualized relevant to a release, okay? So that's kind of number one. Now, where we're actually going to spend a little bit more time is in the products and environments section. So let's start with environments, and then we're going to drill back into products. So here I've got my environments, and you can see I've got a dev environment, a QA environment, a staging environment, and then I've got a couple of production environments that I have set off into different geographies. Now, when I was showing my slides here a second ago, my concept of production that I described was actually 3 clusters, right? So, but here I'm actually showing 3 different environments. So let's say I was going to add an environment, and we're going to call this, prod, actual or whatever we want to call it, and we could label this as production. And then I can actually add clusters and namespaces that are going to fit into this. So this might include prod EU, as well as prod West, prod Asia, and you can do wildcards in here, so you can get kind of funky with it if you want to. You can also use application labels. We could also do namespaces. So no matter how my organization defines production or staging, I actually have a way to model that here and create that clear definition, so that I have a straightforward flow. So now when I say, hey, I'm going to push to production, well, production could mean a bunch of clusters, could mean one namespace, whatever. And one of the cool things about these is they're tightly integrated with the concept of a product, right? So that life cycle. So I'll show you what that means more in depth in a second. But let's start by doing something very simple. And let's say I've got, you can see that here I've got a product called membership. There's one called loan. There's one called interest. So these are all different products, right? And you can see that next to these, there are actually versions that are being referenced. And if I look at this version, I think maybe a better one would be to look at is this trio one. You can see that this application actually has 3 Helm charts that it's deploying, and each of those has their own version associated with it as well. And I can actually do I could do comparisons here if I selected some more stuff. We're not going to spend the time on that, but let's say that I wanted to take something that is in let's say this membership one, You can see it's currently 1369, but in staging I have 1283. So I'm going to grab this one that's in QA and I'm just going to drag it over into staging. Now, what did I mention earlier about products? Products are comparable. Now, this was running a little bit slow for me this morning, so we'll see if this one will load quickly enough. But these are comparable. So what we can do is, because these two applications are part of the same product, we can look at their source and Git automatically, compare the manifests automatically, and find that between these two, we have an app version that has changed. Okay, and this is actually where we're pulling. That's the version that we're exposing to the users here, so that the developers are saying, hey, I got my changes into 1.2.28. I want to make sure that those changes make it into production. Boom. I already know exactly what app version this is, even though there might be multiple images that change underneath the surface, multiple configuration changes. But here I get a diff that shows me exactly what's going to be different. And if I wanted to promote that, I could promote it with a commit right here and run this promotion. But I also have the ability to do a pull request. And depending on the environment, so for example, I think I have a policy where, so I've got staging, for example, here. Let's say that I wanted to go from, I got like a newer version of this loan into prod EU. Because I've defined my environments can also have different policies associated with them. So I can say things like, when something goes to production always requires a pull request. Right. So I can define that, or I could say production always requires a specific workflow to run, or specific testing, or specific approvals, or whatever to happen. So this my comparison is going a little bit slow right now. Maybe Git's running slow, something like that. But it's going to show us the same thing, and it probably would just show us that that pull request would be grayed out and wouldn't let us do it because it would violate the policy. So now I've got this concept. You can see how I can use this manually, where I can promote changes back and forth. Let's look at a product for just a second, and let's just drill down into how these products work. So I'm going to click into this Trio product, and you can see that these are different apps here. So there's a Trio app dev. These are Argo CD applications, right? Trio app QA, Trio app staging. You can see I've got one in production that's currently progressing. I've got one in production Asia and one in production US. Now, the only reason that these are separated is because I wanted them to have a different step or release process between them. But you can actually have overlapping release processes, which I'll talk about in a second. So this gives me a view of everything that's currently deployed as part of this product across all of my environments. And if I look at my releases, I can see that there was a release that was triggered today that actually failed when it got into QA and staging. And so it hasn't gone into these other environments. So let's look at this one really quick. And if I'm a developer, I care when I'm looking at this, I know immediately, when we went to staging, we had an issue. And what was the issue? It looked like we failed to commit the promotion. Okay, interesting. And I could actually jump into the application associated with, I'm looking at the wrong screen. I could jump into the application that this is associated with this and get the status of it. So this will take me directly into that application view. So I can now get into my debugging, and it's going to show me, exactly which release was being worked on. So I've got all that help and information available to me. So that's very useful. Now, the way that these products work is really cool. So the way that we define a product, we actually just create an annotation. And so when you're using, I think most of us who are using Kubernetes day to day are used to using annotations to mark what environment is, what the capabilities of a cluster, things that we're tracking. So this is just marking that a product exists once this annotation is on an application. So it's very easy to add this and then have it automatically be modeled as part of my changes. But then one of the other issues that we talked about or we alluded to when we were looking at these changes is that oftentimes between different environments, there are configuration differences that are not meant to be promoted. So oftentimes an image tag is meant to be promoted. So, I deployed 1.34 version of my application image. Let's deploy that image as well, and let's maybe include some configuration. But there are other things that are parameters that are like, this production instance talks to the production Salesforce, but the staging instance talks to the staging Salesforce. And I have that as set up as maybe part of the configuration is an environmental variable or part of a config map or whatever. And I don't want that change promoted up. And so we can actually model that inside of our product, because remember, products contain comparable applications. So I can, here you can see I specify where to get the version from when I'm displaying the product. So it's looking at in this case, it's a Helm chart YAML, and it's got a path that it's looking at. But it could look at anything. If you wanted it to look at your image tag and have that be the source of the version, that would work too. So you could define that in multiple ways, which is very nice. And we can preview the configuration, and it's going to show us for this specific application what that version is that it's pulling out, so I can make sure it's working. But I also have this concept of promotable properties. So here from my version.yaml, it's going to promote the version. From my chart.yaml, it's going to get the app version. And from my values.yaml, it's going to get these image tags. But let's say I also wanted it to get from my values.yaml some of my resource information. So let's get my values YAML here, and let's specify I'm going to be looking for like, what have we got? It's my analysis template. Let's say I wanted to get, the replica count here. Now here I'm grabbing it just for, I think I'm grabbing it globally, right? Because I've got a wildcard here. So I can actually have wildcards in here, and I can structure this any way I want to, and I can add multiple additional paths from the same file. In fact, these two are the same file, and so I can organize this, separately if I need to. Here, I could include everything if I wanted to. And this entire configuration that I have here is actually just going to be a Kubernetes CRD. Here it's gonna give me a preview of these values. Actually, let's not take the time on that one. But here you can see the YAML for my promotion. It's a promotion template that shows me my chart.yaml, my paths that are going to be promoted and are comparable. And you can see my replica count one that I've added here. And we can also see that this one is set up to move in a queue rather than pushing all at once. So it's supposed to go one after a time. Now, I also have, promotion concurrency. You could terminate current existing releases and actually do a catch up. So if you have enough of those, that would be something you could do. And then we have promotion flows that are applied to this promotion. Okay. So in the concept that we talked about of environments and versions, maybe there's a fourth shadow concept that I want to introduce you to, which is essentially the idea of what flows should apply in what situations. Okay, so on a normal everyday change, we've got here this flow is called the trio flow, and here we move from dev to staging and QA, and then to production, and then we go to prod Asia and prod US. And if I wanted to make a new one, let's make one from scratch really quick. So let's go over and we'll do a promotion flow, and I'm going to create a promotion flow, and I'm going to start from dev, and I'm going to push from dev to QA and staging at the same time. And from staging, I'm going to go to my 3 prod environments at the same time. But each of these, notice, is actually getting set up as a pull request, so that those are going to go into Git as a pull request. They're going to need to get approval. And I've also got my staging here, and I'm going to say that, let's say that right now it's depending on dev, but let's say that I could have my production EU also depend on QA passing as well. So now I can create this more, complex, seemingly complex flow, and I can have this one require QA as well. And so now I've got this kind of dependency map going here. And now let's go back again to our core loop. Okay, what was our core loop? Our core loop was promote changes, test our changes. Okay, so once I get this into staging, I'm going to want to run some tests. So post promotion, I'm going to run some smoke tests. And before I even do that, I want to alert the ops team that this is even happening. So I'm going to send a Slack notification. And let's say that as soon as I start going up into staging, I also want to open a ServiceNow ticket. And then once I have gone through this process and I've gone to my different promotions and I've run, my testing, once that's all complete at the very, very end of the entire process and it's successful, I want to close my ServiceNow ticket. And we'll do that, close success. And if it fails, the entire thing fails, I want to have my ServiceNow closed failure. And so I've just created a whole flow, and this could apply, and this is all just a CRD, right? So each of these environments, now remember the environments we defined earlier. QA could be any number of clusters, namespaces, application labels, any combination of those things. And I have a policy where when I go to, production Asia, that means things need to work in staging and QA, but I could also add in there that I wanted, prod US to be completed too before that happens. And that's going to be reflected in my DAG here, where we can see that prod Asia has this kind of higher level of attention to it. And then you can see I have hooks that are going to run at the very end on success or failure, but I also have these actions that will run, these workflows that will run in between, so that I can do my core loop and I can define this all in a single CRD. So for an ops person, the ops person is looking at this and they're saying, hey, I normally have to build all that with scripts and maybe do manual processes, and it's kind of a pain. But from a developer standpoint, they might not necessarily care about all these steps, but they're going to care when they get the feedback or they know what to do next. The other component that I alluded to a minute ago was that you could have multiple promotion flows apply to the same application. So this is another point where if we go and look at the, let's go and look at the products here. We'll go to this Trio app one again. I think it was a pretty good looking one. This one, we had 3 different promotion flows. So this was the shadow fourth concept I wanted to introduce to you. As a developer, again, I just care about getting my changes to production. But as an ops person, you want to weigh the attention of how much testing and burn in and checks you need to do to make sure that something isn't going to break production, with the on the other side helping the developers be productive. And so you might have something like this where you have a hot fix, and a hot fix is something where there's an issue in production, we want to push immediately, and it's going to go through a pull request and it's going to get some tests on it. And so here you can see I've got this hot fix set up. And this hotfix is going to have its own criteria to run. So I could, for example, tag it. And if I go and look at the settings here, you can see that on the hotfix, it's looking for in the Git revision has hotfix labeled on it. Otherwise, I could have different commit messages or Git revisions or things like that. So if I had like a Git tag, I could use that. So if I tagged something as a hotfix, it would get this direct flow. And this is something where, most organizations haven't mastered a really solid promotion flow like the one we're describing here. But as soon as you do, you realize, oh, actually, wouldn't it be nice if I could have a lower, a quick deployment mode for, it requires an approval from a manager or something, but we can get something directly into production because we need to react quickly. So this puts us in a position where we have a lot more flexibility and power over and control over that. So this is something that's all part of the Codefresh control plane here. So you can see how from the theory discussion, there were a number of concepts we introduced. And as we've been going through it, you're like, oh yeah, this makes sense because I'm promoting my product to my environment. Environment could be, a number of different Kubernetes clusters. And just by even adopting that terminology, we've simplified the whole flow of delivering software. So really, it's almost as simple as just providing these definitions to developers. And they're very natural to say like, hey, let's just put an app version on our Helm chart, and let's have that reflected maybe on our image tags or whatever. And now everybody's speaking the same language, and I'm pushing to production. And production means, any number of clusters. And I don't have to worry about that as a developer. But as an ops person, of course, I can define that and change it. And it doesn't require more education for my users. Now, when I go back, another kind of concept I want to introduce here is that you can have multiple instances of applications as part of products. So here, see this prod US? I've been alluding to this entire time, but I haven't actually shown you it. If we look at prod US, you can see that this is actually 3 clusters. Isn't that cool? We've been looking at this for 20 minutes and you didn't care that there were 3 clusters in prod US. This whole time you were just thinking, oh, why are you doing prod US and prod Asia? Why not just one prod? Well, you could. But here you can see what it's done is my product, I have a product that exists and I actually have 2 instances of the components, right? So I have one that's, in this case, it's labeled, the application is interest west, and this one, it is interest east, right? And if I look at these, and if I'm doing a promotion, and I move from, let's say this loan has a different version, right? What's it going to do when I do a promotion to a place where there are 2? Right. Well, what it's going to do is it's going to create a diff that's going to show both of the places, both of the individual manifests that need to be updated. And again, my promotion has been running slow this morning. I don't know why. I need to ping the team, see what's going on. It's something with my specific instance. But that concept, right, just means that, hey, I'm going to production. Ops wants me to have 2 instances there, because they have 2 different clusters or 3 different clusters. But notice we actually looked, there were 3 clusters, but only 2 instances of the application. So it's not going to force me to put it on the cluster that doesn't have that application. Now, as soon as I deploy an application there and I tag it as part of this product, then you would see 3, right? So this is a good check-in for questions or comments. We had a good discussion about people's favorite number of nodes on Kubernetes clusters. Maybe I'll ask you too, what's your favorite theme for naming environments or nodes or clusters? Is it Norse? A lot of people like to go with sort of mythology, and they have different mythological figures they like to put in. Some people like to do locations, geographies. I know some people have done Lord of the Rings locations, Lord of the Rings characters. What's your favorite naming convention? Dave Chambers says Ghost in the Shell. So I'm trying to think. I feel like there's like 3 named characters in Ghost in the Shell, but my memory is not too good. So there's got to be a bunch more, but I like that answer. Okay, so we can see we've got these different promotable applications, and we can see which values need to be updated in each of these different applications. So we can see that US East and US West have these differences here. Now, these manifests between Lone West and Lone East could be totally different, right? They could have a bunch of differences between them that we didn't include in our promotion template, and so they will not show up here. And here you can see that we can't do the pull request because it violates the policy for this specific environment. But we could add specific workflows that are allowed within the policy. And again, this whole thing is going to be, this promote button is a commit, right? In this case, it's going to be commits directly that happen from me. So this is going to be a way that I can create this promotion. And this is something else we didn't touch on, is that everything within Codefresh, any button that does a write operation is a commit. Okay, so the pull request, it's a pull request or a commit. So none of it is going to be just saved, randomly in the screen or whatever. It's all gets saved somewhere. OT says he can barely read this text in the stream. Let me just zoom in a little bit. It gets a little bit funky to zoom too much, but you can see these different applications here that we're comparing that are part of the promotion. If I take one of these out, it's only going to the other one of course won't be committed. But yeah, it's going to promote both of these applications because they're part of the same product. Okay. So here we've touched on a couple of concepts, and I think you can see how this would make a developer's life a lot easier, but I hope you can also see how this would make an operations person's life a lot easier. Again, it comes down to, am I promoting applications or am I promoting a product? Am I promoting Git hashes or new versions? Am I pushing to cluster US West 1 Thor? Is Shell the name in Ghost? Isn't her name Shell? Who's the main character in Ghost in the Shell? Guys, we gotta figure this out. I can't believe I don't know, because I'm actually a huge fan of the movie. I didn't watch the TV show. There's the major. Matoko. Okay, so it'd be Matoko. All right. So we don't have to care about the cluster and that it's the Matoko cluster or Kusanagi or the kernel or whatever. It could just be production. And I don't care what the cluster is behind it. So all right. So we've gone through these different ideas, showing you what some of it looks like. Just, as we, and please send any questions you have here lingering, but why, should you trust me or Codefresh? Well, we do have this wonderful software delivery platform, but we're also a leading Argo maintainer. So I'm an Argo CD maintainer myself. I think we said that at the top of the hour. I do most work on Argo CD. Last year I was the number 3 committer on Argo CD. Between somebody else on the Codefresh team and the lead maintainer from Intuit. We offer Argo support and training. We've got GitOps training and certifications. And I think, John, that actually is maybe a good point for you to jump in and share that you might have a little gimme for that.
Thanks, Dan. It's not a little segue there, but so thanks a lot for your presentation there, Dan. That's awesome stuff. Just some housekeeping notes here before we kind of turn into the general questions. Flipping back and forth. That's fine. So if you check out codefresh.io, there you'll find a site that looks like this, where you can go ahead and download try GitOps Cloud for free if you'd like. Start a free trial if you'd like. But as Dan was alluding to, we actually have a number of certifications that you can check out. These are our Codefresh GitOps certifications, and they provide basically a structured learning path for designing and equipping you as a DevOps professional with practical GitOps skills, using Argo CD, using Argo rollouts, etc. So we actually have 3 courses available. We have our GitOps Fundamentals course, which introduces the basics of GitOps, that includes also the Argo CD setup, application synchronization, progressive delivery strategies, etc. We have GitOps at Scale, which focuses on obviously scaling your GitOps practices, and this covers things like multi-cluster management, application sets, etc. And then finally, lastly but not leastly, we have our GitOps for Enterprise, which delves into enterprise-level GitOps implementations, and that's addressing topics like RBAC and multi-tenant environments, etc. So these are all available, and as a way of saying thank you to all of you, we actually have this code that you can use, webinar-gitops-drama. Yes, I know. It's basically a free complimentary course for GitOps fundamentals. So you can start your learning journey today by using this code. So we'll leave this up there. It is limited to 50 people, and also it will expire in a week. So make sure to take advantage of this today. And you'll find this all available on our site, which is at learning.codefresh.io. And just as we should also mention the Discord, as mentioned here by Dave.
Yeah, you'll
as well.
get an invite when you sign up for the certification to the GitOps Champions Discord, of which Dave Chambers is a member. And Dave, I have to laugh with you because you said Kusanagi, and now I'm realizing that Motoko, Kusanagi, the major, they're all the same character. I totally miffed it. So thank you for pointing it out.
Awesome. We'll have that on the next Kubernetes Jeopardy, I guess. So there you go, as a callback. Don't forget, we also have our webinars. So the one that you're watching right now is this one. We actually have one coming up later this week featuring our improved Terraform provider for those who are interested. And probably most importantly, we should also mention Argo Unpacked. This is a new podcast from Dan and Revital, where they talk to a bunch of folks in the Argo community. Dan, do you want to talk a little bit about this?
Yeah, we do. We basically cover Argo news. So if you're an Argo CD user and you just want to know what's going on in the community, we talk about like what some of the latest changes are. We did a whole episode on Argo CD 3.0. This episode that you're showing here, we were all talking about doing Argo CD at scale and some of the different metrics that are available to help you measure how well different components are using. And a lot of that stuff, we talk about it, and then we're actually creating a lot of Argo CD issues for, to go, like, we were like, oh, this is a great thing that people should know. And we're like, is that in documentation? Like, oh, it's not. Let's go create the issue and go create documentation. So it's kind of a great way to be part of the community. And you can ask live questions. If you need help debugging something, you can put us on the spot and see how that goes.
All right, awesome. So make sure to check that out. We broadcast them to LinkedIn, to all our socials, basically, and this is done every 2 weeks, so make sure to check that out. And don't forget, this will be available as a recording up on our YouTube channel, which is at youtube.com/octopusdeploy. Like and subscribe, as the kids say. So I'll just show here the banner. There you go. So make sure to make this a bookmark, if not your homepage. We post videos there all the time. Awesome stuff. Dan, anything else you want to mention before we wrap up?
Yes, I would like you on Twitter or X or Blue Sky to ping me and tell me what your favorite name of a Kubernetes node is. I would like you to tell me that. I would like to.
All right, so Dan's available at Today Was Awesome. Is that right?
Yeah. Send me pictures of your nodes.
Oh, geez. Okay.
Send me your nodes.
Send me your nodes. All right. We'll wrap up with that. Perfect. All right. Well, on behalf of Dan and myself, thank you all for your time and attention in attending today's webinar. Don't forget to obviously check out our upcoming ones as well. Maybe we'll have Dan on another webinar soon. But until next time, happy deployments, everyone. Take care.